Welcome back, everyone, to the next episode of Data Analytics Chat, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges taking place in the data world. Today, we're going to look at the world of generative AI. It's been making all the headlines, but we're going to look at it at a different point of view. Has it overshadowed traditional AI models? So I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, Hugo Delgado, who's a senior data executive. So welcome, Hugo.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So it's good to have you on the podcast. I guess, do you want to, for the listeners, give a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. So I've come to data science through a circuitous route. I've been a data scientist for about 21 years. Started life off as a fixed income trader on Wall Street. That lasted until Lehman Brothers blew up the market, then spent about 12 years in different investment banks and hedge funds, raised a few, was a partner in a few, but all with the bent of algorithmic trading and using what was then quantitative data science, and then what changed into data science around the advent of neural network processing in 2013, 2014. Late of consulting, been in consulting the last 5 years, helping some of the largest companies in the world integrate data and push really the forefront of what data science and data can do for them and trying to really integrate it into their culture. So that's a quick 60 seconds about myself.
Brilliant. And then obviously, coming from the consulting background, you'll have that, I guess you touched on different industries and how they've looked at generative AI.
Yeah, very much.
Brilliant. All right, let's dive straight in then. Why is generative AI currently dominating conversation, do you think?
There's a number of reasons, right? One, once ChatGPT hit the marketplace and some of the others like the Meta models or the Amazon models were released to the broad market, you saw the power of semantic understanding. One of the things that was always challenging about typical artificial intelligence and even basic machine learning was the interpretability of the results and the efficacy of the results to the common user, right? When you use ChatGPT, you don't need to know any data science to use it. You don't need to be a specialist. You don't need to interpret a vector array or anything like that. You can simply interpret the output and it's useful to you right now. To any service providing company, whether you're a GM or you're a Meta, that's immensely interesting because it's value derived from the AI model, useful right now to your user. And that the power of that became exceedingly apparent very quickly. The limits of it is a wholly different discussion. But I think that's why generative AI captured everybody's minds. An executive could clearly see, okay, instead of investing in a data science team and getting all of these models and all of these caveats about the R-squared score and understanding exactly how much I could trust the model and then building confidence, I got to see the output immediately. I got to put it in front of my users in a way they could understand in English and use it immediately. So it was value add. It was value add right now. And relatively, from an integration standpoint, relatively cheap value add from a data science discipline perspective. That's why I think it took over the conversation very quickly.
Yeah, because it's obviously it just went crazy, wasn't it? Really, the market just went mad for it. And like I said, I think a lot of things, obviously you touched on like the limitations of it. I think the knowledge has obviously been understood. It's still a baby, isn't it? Like it's infant data. Well, I know LLMs have been around for a while, but it's still infant what it can, like the capacity, what it can do at the moment, isn't it?
Very much. And the transformer-based models, and specifically the paper, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have read it, that really brought forth the power of transformer-based models was a seminal work in terms of applying the ability to use massive parameter modeling to influence predictability. And then you have to talk about the advent of perplexity and the difference between an LLM and its ability to predict the next value in a given series, if that's language or mathematics, and then its in applicability into industry. There's a lot of meat on that bone in terms of what an LLM really is, what its applicability is, and how your listeners can use it specifically. So happy to get into any of that.
Yeah. So how's it overshadowed like the more mature AI technologies that can deliver like proven ROI?
So, I think because it solves problems that you couldn't solve before, which was applicability to the user, right? Whether you're a Pinterest, you're a Meta, you're a Google, you're an Amazon, you face the same problem when integrating, or even if you're a legacy industry, right? Dow Chemical, right? You face the same problem with implementing AI ML across any part of your portfolio. And so you had to hire a specialized team. You had to have an executive that was the bridge to understanding the impact of AI/ML to the strategy itself. And then you had to communicate whatever value was derived all the way down to your base user to have any sort of efficacy, right? And the reason it overshadowed AI/ML is because it was so much easier to use, right? You're talking about a difference that was tantamount to electricity versus the candle, right? So AI/ML could bring the light, could shed light on different things, but fully electrified understanding, that was generative AI. And so everybody wanted it, and everybody wanted it right now. The difference is that unlike that massive shift, that the common AI/ML solution base, when you're looking at spending money and where exactly to put resources, still has enormous value. And those are much more easily integrated solution sets than generative AI. And you also have to appreciate, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the limitations of an LLM and the limitations of generative AI. For example, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with common regression based models like XGBoost, right? They have a very certain level of error that you can measure. A model can become very accurate, predicting anything from sea level rise to the alpha generated by an algorithmic trading fund, or what brand advertisement is likely to have higher efficacy. Any of those use cases, right, have some applicability to those standard types of modeling. The difference is one LLM can put it in English, can write you a brand strategy statement or a new product suggestion right now. Perplexity is not accuracy. And that's the core of really where the limit is, which is the perplexity of a system is the ability to interpret and predict the next value in a sequence. But that doesn't mean the sequence itself is accurate, right? Which is what gave you the advent of RAG-based modeling and in reference architectures in general. So it became like a Q learning structure where it would play the game and it would get smarter over time, which is what you want from a model. But that doesn't mean that you have to invest 3 million every single time you're looking for some sort of AI/ML solution. The things that are on the shelf right now have massive value. And if you're looking at really integrating it across an enterprise, there's a lot of steps to that. Is this, you have to do everything from changing your culture to understanding data engineering and lineage, all the way through implementation of standard predictive analytics, let alone AI/ML, before you graduate up that maturity curve to implementing AI/ML based solutions. And then you can really start to use the power of the tip of the spear, which is generative AI, right? What I think a lot of executives did was they saw the power of this and they said, I will need this and I need this now, and started writing massive checks. And then they ran into, and I saw this at some of our larger clients, you ran into massive problems of the data culture is not in place. You have no data governance. You have no chief data officer. You haven't implemented the basics of controls and in terms of model drift and bias before you can even get to generative AI. But just like the advent of electricity, everybody wanted the lights and they wanted the lights on now.
And then it's the whole, that's another issue, isn't it? Like scaling Gen AI solutions is, like you touched on, like the whole like change management piece. That's the biggest challenge, isn't it, for businesses? Because you've got to flip his head upside down, basically, haven't you? You've got to change everyone's. And then obviously, like Gen AI has caused a lot of fear factor as well, isn't it? Like, you're going to take my job, blah, 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 all these sort of things. And obviously, you've got obviously different types of people to deal with, haven't you? People will be risk averse. People will be, yeah, let's go for it. So that culture piece is the biggest challenge for businesses.
Oh, it's the whole thing. It's honestly, it's interesting because from a statistical perspective, the model is really cool. Don't get me wrong. As a math nerd, I love it. And I love the power of it. And I love where it's going to go. But from an executive point of view, people are always the problem and they're always the solution. And what I mean by that is that the cultural problems that you have today are not going to be solved by generative AI. They're going to be exacerbated by it. And so understanding that the use of data and becoming a data centric or a data led industry, you hear that a lot in terms of strategy statements across the Fortune 500, right?
Yep.
Becoming that level of data driven organization is a massive cultural change and requires alignment across functions. And none of that gets solved by generative AI. Generative AI is a fantastic tool to accelerate the adoption of specific things, to disseminate information, like everything from an internal cultural wiki can be a Gen AI tool. But realistically, what we're talking about is a really effective chatbot. And it's a massively effective one. And it speaks in semantically correct language, which is fantastic, right? It's not a rules based model. And crossing that bridge is all about taking a step back, following the strategy that will lead you to value, and really starting to unpack that, yeah, generative AI is powerful. We need to be at the front of it. We need to integrate this across industries. But the culture problem is
Yeah.
huge. And
Sometimes,
yeah, to your point about people being afraid of losing their jobs, is legitimate, right? Like the job that I would be most afraid of losing right now is in graphic design or brand advertising. Because once the model understands how to communicate with your customer, the number of ads from graphics and integration between text and video and understanding when to use an image on what platforms, what model, and how to connect the nodes and how to exactly talk to this friend to sell this product. And you put that in terms of an active generative AI. Right now it's passive. It's a receptacle, right? Once we figure out active generative AI, that game changes. And I would be much more afraid of losing my job at that particular pace. But I think they're safe for at least another 2-3 years.
yeah, no. I think obviously we touched on that the data driven buzzword, isn't it? It's a buzzword. It's never just going to benefit companies to become like that, but it's going to take so much time because it's the whole education piece as well, isn't it? You've got to educate the whole company, it's a whole change. And how long is it going to take? You can't put a time on it, really, can you?
It's gonna take years. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I found has been immensely challenging, even for people who are bought into this data driven journey as a strategic imperative from the CEO and the C-suite on down. Once you've bought in, that's fantastic. There are still people who aren't. Let's put that to the side for a second. But the data journey, understanding data analysis and how it can work, is all about alignment across functions. Let me give you an example. Right? We worked with a SaaS company, and it was one of the larger ones. And one of the problems was even their sales organization couldn't define when a sale had occurred. When can you recognize that revenue? When can I book it? When can I get paid for it? What's the source of commission? What's conversion mean? When should I hit somebody with a brand ad based on that converted? If they've already converted, am I now extending brand trust and brand equity, or am I still doing sales? And to what degree can we attribute different marketing activity to different movements along the sales journey? Right. So you have different cross functions that will never agree on what conversion means because it depends on the perspective of exactly what their role is. And that's one of the examples that leads to this kind of larger problem, right? One of the most valuable people in an organization that's, for example, a SaaS company is going to be your chief revenue officer, right? The person leading the sales team, generating adoption to make sure that the companies that you're selling to, the enterprises that actually purchase your good, aren't just putting it on the shelf and it becomes shelfware. You never get adoption. You never get that recurring revenue. Right. One of the problems there is that how do you turn that one individual, that knowledge, that 30 years of experience into something that can be disseminated via generative AI across the entire organization? Right. Can you actually create a bot or generative AI model that's like talking to your CRO? Right. And once you can do that, then it becomes an adoption problem. And once it's an adoption problem, now you're really hitting your stride because once you become active generative AI, and let me define that term a little bit because there's a lot of excitement around it and there's a lot of misuses of the term. So passive generative AI is I ask ChatGPT a question, it gives me a series of answers, right? So I have to prompt it. And prompt engineering is a whole discipline.
Yeah.
We could have a whole conversation about that. Active generative AI is give me a goal and I'll seek it. And I'll seek it semantically. Give me control of your graphics. Give me control your brand messaging. Give me control of the marketing. Give me control of when to hit what sales targets when. And give me control of when to approve budgets. The mastery of this correct sequence to reach your goal is the next step, I think, in enterprise level generative AI, especially, and I think at the forefront in terms of marketing, communications, and brand strategy, because that's the area where you're going to have massive trillion parameter data sets. And if you're talking to a Meta or you're talking to, let's say, a Pinterest or even a Google, that's where I'm sure they're investing, which is understanding exactly how I can automate the full end-to-end chain and understand how I can just let AI run the show. Now, I don't know how many years it's going to be before people trust that level of adoption, but capability, we're almost there.
Yeah, very nice. We'll see. I guess only time will tell. So, what has there been any sort of examples of traditional AI solutions that enterprises have overlooked due to the Gen AI hype?
Yeah. So I think it's a situation where the perfect has become the enemy of the good, right? So let's say, and this is a fairly common thing. Let's say, I'm using marketing because it's the discipline that tends to be at the forefront of the use case. And we can come up with examples that are outside marketing, but the top of my tongue is, or rather the tip of my tongue is, in terms of making directional shifts or incremental change for legacy enterprise. I think that on the marginal basis, the greatest efficacy can be reached by traditional AI ML implementations. Okay, what's that mean, right? So if I'm a Dow Chemical or I'm a GM or I'm a Kellogg's or I'm any sort of legacy company that has a storied history, or even a Disney, for example, and I am trying to buy into this data-driven strategy. Do I even honestly know what that means to be data-driven? In order to correctly apply the marginal benefit of data and AI, you have to look at the traditional solutions and use the entire solution set. Generative AI is fantastic and it'll do a lot of wonderful things for you. But that doesn't mean that if you're Disney and you're investing, or you really ought to be investing millions of dollars in data capture and data cleaning and data governance before applying an XGBoost model or even a simple OLS regression, right? The power of understanding of that insight can actually give me directional value today. And the reason that's valuable is that, okay, I can hire a data science team, a fairly proficient data scientist. I can implement this solution at Disney today, and I might get a 3 to 5% lift in overall sales. Now, quarter on quarter, I can take that to my CEO and say, okay, I've delivered 5% this quarter. I think the total efficacy of this basis solution is maybe 15% over the next 2.5 years. Can I have 10 million in the next budget to reinvest, level up that solution to the more sophisticated types of solutions, and then move from there? And we're going to bring generative AI across this entire journey. We're going to weave it through the solution, but it's not today. It's not tomorrow. It might be next year. And over the course of that year, standard regressions and classifications, standard NLP based modeling will give me lift today, where generative AI will take an investment over time, and it needs to be woven in, right? What I think, let me take a step back. What I think is challenging is that people may make the assumption that it's generative AI today, tomorrow, and into the future. And that may be true. But in order to actually have generative AI have the greatest efficacy of any system within your portfolio, you need to build it on a solid foundation. And that means part of that solid foundation is true and tested AI ML based solutions that will then drive the generative AI in a true ensemble end-to-end type of model.
And I speak to many leaders. They said scaling Gen AI solutions, that's a massive challenge for companies. Is what way do they take it? And obviously it's that aligning it all together, isn't it? Bringing it all together. Because it's got to work. You've got to put it together, and you like align together sort of thing to work appropriately, isn't it?
Yeah. And one of the challenges is that, especially for a company that's been around for 30, 40 years, even how long has Meta been around? We're looking at 30 years for that now. So if you're talking about a company like a GM, for example, or like a US Steel, right? They don't want to be left out in the cold. And part of the analysis has to be, how long is this going to take? How many dollars do we have to invest in? Are we really moving over to being truly data driven? And what does it mean to scale that across an organization? What it means, right? Because the technology problem has been solved, right? Let's start there. From a scaling perspective, there are people who know how to do that really well. Like Deloitte and the Accentures of the world do that fantastic. They will scale your solution. They will show you how to do that, and they will help you with the change management. The cultural shift, helping people understand that this model, this neural network, this generative AI is not a black box. It is not an end all be all. Understand the limitations, and that it is a tool that is not out to replace them, but is meant to accelerate them. Right? Let's go back to that 30-year sales executive that I was talking about. If we can make him 18 times more available or disseminate that knowledge across an organization using a generative AI based wiki, the same questions would be answered. So instead of 5 meetings a day, he's virtually in 60 with the same sales org. You understand the power of disseminating human experience and knowledge, which I think is the base of the cultural shift. Now, you also have people who have done things a certain way, and they've done things a certain way for the last 15 years, and they're going to be very resistant to change. And that's fairly typical of any large corporate organization, right? Sometimes they get siloed, sometimes they build fiefdoms. Breaking that up is more about empowering that executive and their teams than it is changing the way that they do things on a day-to-day basis. They have to buy in first. And so being a data executive is about helping them understand, I'm going to take you on a journey. We have to go on this journey because this is part of the strategic imperative of making sure the company stays relevant or serves its users or customers the best way. But in order to do that, I'm going to empower you, and I'm going to empower you by doing X, Y, and Z. And that's going to mean there's going to be a change in the way that things get done, but maybe not today, maybe over the course of the next 6 months. So there has to be an on-ramp, and the race to get things done with generative AI kind of shortens that on-ramp, and you're going to get a little bit of a pushback. And so that's part of the cultural resistance to artificial intelligence in general, and generative AI just made it that much sharper, that much more acute.
Yeah. And then also you just touched on it a bit. So how does the rush to adopt like Gen AI solutions create challenges like integrating into a broader business strategy then?
So the question is, how does it apply to broader business strategy?
Yeah, like how, because obviously everyone's rushing to adopt Gen AI now. And then how does that create a challenge for businesses? Because
here's what I would say. It depends on the industry, but here's what I would say. The problem is the rush to adopt leads to the creation of shelfware. And what I mean by that is like, there's this cool new thing that I have to have. It is the sexy thing. People are throwing millions of dollars of it. My competitors have it. I have to have it. My users expect it. Adoption is really the name of the game in terms of the strategic solution across an enterprise level organization, right? So scaling it is a technological problem that is solved relatively easily in terms of the processing power and the cloud-based systems we have now. Culturally, that takes talented executives. They're out there, right? So you can hire the right people to help people adopt and buy into the data story and figure out how to become a data-driven organization. There aren't enough of them out there, but they're there. You can hire that. You can hire that talent set. Culturally, it becomes a much more significant issue. You have people who are much more entrenched in legacy systems and who are acutely aware of the limitations of data and AI, especially when you are operating with people face to face. There's still value of that. And so that cultural journey will take much more time. The last piece is really understanding how to drive adoption through the user base and integrate that and the feedback loop of that back into the enterprise. So let me give you an example of exactly what I mean. Right. So let's assume it's 3 years from now and Meta has released a new type of AI that is going to, Meta says, you release all of your user data to us. We'll integrate it with what Facebook has, and then we'll communicate back to your users exactly what products they want to see in what order to drive adoption, to drive sales, to drive brand love and trust. And it's an open bidding war for the highest bidder, right? Because for the highest bidder, we will make sure we outperform all your competitors, right? So that's a conversation that's going to be had somewhere in the next 3 to 5 years in the marketing space. So that means that you have now put a barrier between yourself, the enterprise, and your customers, because someone else is handling the messaging end to end, right? And that means that an AI is then controlling the brand. And so the problem with that is that humans, I guess this is the way I would put it. Humans think much more slowly and perform much more slowly than generative AI in terms of shifting to the conversation that is present at the moment, specifically in social media. That's not always a bug. Right. So the ability to take a step back and appreciate that a moment or in the appetites of the human individual or your specific user base may only last for 6 months. Something may be a fad, right? And that's something that generative AI could never tell you, right? It could never tell you if you take the brand in this direction and you adopt this parlance or this patois or this dialect of speaking for the 14 to 21-year-old demographic in this part of the world, you may capture more of that market, sure, and it'll be dollars today, which is something generative AI can and will be able to do. But the net long-term effects of your brand, that's something different to measure. And sure, I can hear people in the background, not real, but in my head saying you can give it guidelines. You can protect against that. Sure, you can, but the ability to see across the next horizon to figure out where, from a strategic perspective, humans need to go in order to really bring their users along or grow an industry is still a human condition. And so I think generative AI helps us forget that, because the semantic understanding is so human-like, that it, from a Turing test perspective, either we're past it or really close to it, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely going to be interesting times ahead how businesses incorporate it, the direction they go, because it's going to be interesting discussions across the whole business, isn't it? Again, it's going back to
It's
the
exciting. It's
cultural
a very
piece as
exciting
well.
time to be in data science.
So then, also you touched on the limitations before. So are companies investing in Gen AI without fully understanding its limitations?
Yeah, I think so. I think other than the folks over at OpenAI and perhaps at Google DeepMind, and sure, very talented folks at Amazon and Meta, there are far fewer people who understand the real limitations of transformer-based models and even RAG-augmented transformer-based models than understand the impacts. And that's pretty common, right? It's going to be the really talented ML engineer who understands the specific limitations of the perplexity score of a given next iteration of a sequence, or understands exactly when there might be ghosts or artifacts within the system. And for example, ChatGPT gives you a great answer, but it happens not to be true. Things of that sort, what we call, what I believe is a little bit of a misnomer, which is hallucinations, right? The system hallucinates. And so it'll learn over time. It'll become better at hallucinating if it has that human in the loop type of feedback. But the difference, the real crux of it, is that perplexity is a great way of measuring the efficacy of an LLM in terms of its error. It is not accuracy in the same way that traditional AI ML is. And so that is a core limitation that is part of the structure of large language models. It's not something that's going to go away. So you have to appreciate that if, for example, and this would be, fairly simple with the tool set that we have. If you had a perplexity-based LLM system that gave you a specific sequence and that you could test it against a very typical NLP-based solution, or even a series of regression-based analysis and predictions for accuracy, those two systems together become much more, what I would say, comfortable, especially like in a financial sense, in terms of investments, than I would entrusting an LLM with trading, with high frequency trading, for example, a given portfolio, especially if you're a fiduciary. So there are ways to take a step back, slow down, augment, put guidelines, guardrails within the power of generative AI. There are also ways to augment and speed it up. But I would say that the limitations have more to do with the lack of understanding of what transformer-based modeling really is and its limitations across cross-functional capabilities than it is really that the model has any sort of problems, or the types of models have any sort of problems in them from a specific data science perspective.
And I could just see the interaction between business and technical, trying to get that knowledge share, that knowledge understanding is going to be that's another game.
AI strategy is one of those unicorn positions, right? Someone who can speak both languages. That's an immensely valuable person in an organization. And those I've met are few and far between. Right. One of the jokes that I always like to tell is that when you get a group of data scientists together, it becomes a little bit academic, becomes a little bit of a university, right? When data scientists are talking to data scientists, one of the most effective ways to use in an analytics team or data scientists that I've seen implemented across a number of different companies is to crack that silo. And yeah, sure, you'll have a head of data science, but there's no data science department. Those data scientists are embedded in marketing, in budgeting, in HR, in operations. And so the value that you derive out of them is based off of the function that they serve, instead of getting them all in a room, and it becomes like a university campus where it's debating very specific, highly nuanced statistical problems that need to be solved, but the enterprise still moves along. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because I think also it's now data science is about getting more like domain focus, isn't it? If you've got that knowledge in a like business domain, it's you're going to understand the business problems better than being more techie focused, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's much more of a take a step back and go up into the canopy beyond the discipline itself in data science. That's about building trust. There's from a data scientist perspective, at core, as statisticians, you're either a frequentist or you're a Bayesian. And so that once you decide which team you're on, will decide what models you buy into and what processes and testing and experimentation you like to do and your team does. And that's fantastic. But once you reach the point of implementing models to make changes, and I've seen companies that are on both sides of that coin, that the problem is in terms of building trust, right? You're going to tell me that this computer is going to do better than I am at this, and I've been at it for the last 25 years. Is it fair? People don't say that, but that's what they mean, right? My gut says, my intuition says that this brand campaign is going to fail, but the machine says that I'm wrong. And so being a data executive is all about, realistically, if you're going to be effective, is all about building that cross-functional trust, that you understand the problem, you understand the people, and you understand that the purpose of the data science is to serve a business function. It's not an end in itself.
Yeah. And then, so how can organizations assess their readiness for AI adoption then of these technologies? Because I guess they want to align it with their business goals, don't they?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, obviously any C-suite that is leading a Fortune 500, at least I would hope, has a strategic vision, right? From the CEO on down. I'm sure a lot of those mission statements include the words data-driven, data-led, right? And there's been broad buy-in across industries that this is the wave of the future. This is the way that we need to go. And most, surprisingly, you'll find data science departments at companies you didn't expect that would have them, like waste management, for example. Disney is another one. And that part of the journey is well on its way. And I think from an enterprise level, once you've made that decision to be data driven, you really have to understand what that means for each of the functions underneath that particular pyramid. And disseminating that knowledge, making people feel comfortable that they don't have to be statisticians to use these things, understand the insights that are driven from them, that adopting them is going to empower them rather than replace them. I think that's where the conversation really has to begin in order to increase data and AI efficacy across enterprises in general.
yeah. And another thing, like we touched on it earlier, like the Gen AI boom, everyone got sidetracked. So how should leaders focus, ensure they're not chasing the latest trends instead of building AI ecosystems?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And so the ecosystem, and I'm glad you brought that up, that is all important, right? So generative AI is not the ecosystem. It is a component that you're going to latch onto, that you're going to use. It's a tool, but the ecosystem itself is critical. For example, we worked for a large social media platform. And so their data acquisition was entirely broken. And what I mean by that is that they ingested terabytes of data on consistently, and it would update on a daily basis, but no one understood what it meant. So you had models built off of these systems, and no one had asked very basic questions of how are you defining this metric? How are you defining the date bounds you put on the data pool that you use to feed into this model? Right? For example, I'll give you a real world example. This particular organization was pulling data from the first half of every single month in terms of user behavior. And so what they were missing, a massive part of they were missing was human behavioral, which is people tend to get paid on a cycle, right? Every 2 weeks or every month. For whatever reason, and this is before we got there, those particular 2 weeks fell outside of those paydays. And so you got aberrant behavior because purchase upticks would occur outside of those behaviors because people tend to spend more money after they get paid, right? Basic behavioral science. And so that's a great illustration. I love that example because it really shows you that an arbitrary decision when it comes to data, lacking alignment across functions, because I swear to God, if they had asked one salesperson what should be the window for this data pool, they would have been like, you might want to include the day after or the few days after payday. You might want to look at that. A sales executive would have caught that. And so aligning data and metric definitions is not something an ML engineer would think of doing, nor would it be a data scientist or a statistician. They're like, I'm going to test 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 9. I'm going to experiment based upon it. But it lacked the actual contextual understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. And so that's a great example of the data-driven journey is much longer and much more involved than you might think otherwise, right? Because having data scientists, let me put it this way. Let me put it in a very blunt fashion. For data science to help marketing, marketing has to teach more marketing to the data scientist than the data scientist has to teach marketing statistics. And that's the reality of it. The data scientist has to become a jack of all trades, or they're not going to provide the value, which is why breaking that into de-siloing them and breaking them and embedding them in areas, there should be a marketing data scientist. There should be an ops data scientist. There should be a human and natural language data scientist. And to some degree, you'll see that in organizations. But that's where they really start to drive values, when they understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. So understand the business
Exactly.
terms. So what's the value they can add there? Because that's the more you know, the more they're gonna understand what's trying to achieve out of each division, isn't it?
Exactly. And so and the teams that do this start to become proactive, because if you're the data scientist, you're sitting there, the marketer is not going to know exactly what tests you need to run or what models you might want to use, or, hey, actually, if I use the generative adversarial neural network here, I might get better efficacy out of our chatbot than if I use this AWS model over here. They're not going to know that. They don't need to know that. But they might have what if I pull this data from sales and marketing and I match that against our enterprise budget data, and then I match that against our actual consumer spend overall in terms of user acquisition. And I pull in all of these data points that you might think are disparate. As a data scientist, you might see statistical relationships that they might not see from a functional perspective. And then you start with that basic knowledge of marketing, you might actually be able to add value to the organization in general. In fact, I would say, and this might be controversial, that the most valuable degree that a data scientist can have is probably an MBA.
Interesting thoughts. So then, how can the conversation shift to include the value of traditional AI solutions without underpinning generative AI models?
You have to realize that certain problems are only going to be solved by traditional AI/ML, and they're going to be solved more cheaply by AI/ML.
I guess
right?
more. How can it? Because a lot of the conversation has gone generative AI, hasn't it? How can it get more for that balance? Because, like I say, in the tech space, obviously you'll probably understand that, but more business. If you're in a more senior business type position, you probably got straight with generative AI solutions because that's the talk of the town.
Yeah, the best analogy that I can come up with right now is that a generative AI is a Ferrari, and Ferraris are fun to drive. They're fast. They'll get you where you're going. They will be flashy. They'll attract users. That's great. You don't want to drive one in the snow, right? And so parsing terrible. Well, yeah, if you like to scale, but generally speaking, if you want to get from A to B, it's not the best tool. Right. And it's the same thing. You're going to need the slower, sloggy, giant expedition with the snow tires on it. And that's going to be your typical regression based modeling, or that's going to be your classification model or your rules based decision tree. That's going to solve the problem. It's going to solve it in a way that you can trust it. So you actually can empower your business now. So sometimes there's that Malcolm Gladwell book, right? That's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Both have their value. Generative AI is thinking fast. You need to not forget the thinking slow.
But even though driving Ferrari in the snow might be fun, but obviously it's not. You're probably more likely to crash it. So what advice would you give to enterprise leaders trying to get through the noise and build effective strategies?
The single best recommendation I can give to executives looking to do exactly that. And there's two answers to this question. The first is, if you're a data executive yourself and you lead a data team, the answer to that is put your data scientists and your ML engineers into a crash course in whatever function they're supporting. Invest in that training, because it will come back to you 20-fold. I promise you. Well, that will be hugely effective. Train your data scientists in the function that they support. That's number one. If you're not a data executive, what I would say is that the best piece of advice that I can give you is understand or hire the right person that understands your business and can recommend to you a data strategy that you can understand and can explain to a 5-year-old. Because the true demonstration of understanding is the ability to break things down into simple circuits and explain it to someone else, the ability to teach it, right? It really shows understanding. And if your strategy is so complex that you cannot explain it in simple terms, you might have the wrong one. And the same applies to data, right? It gets lost in that because the mathematics are rather difficult for the common person. And that's fine. But people are people. And so the data strategy should be simple. It should be understood, and it should be something that can be explained by you to your team. And it should have a theme or a method about transformation and empowerment. It's a great tool. And so focus on that and try not to get lost in the sexy new thing, because I don't know if you followed the news, but Google just released the Willow chip, right? And we might be coming on a quantum computing advent in terms of understanding exactly what compute power really looks like, right? And so 4 weeks ago, before they released that, I've said Bitcoin is probably going to be around for the next 15 years until you have a machine that can crack the hash code, right? So until you can crack that encryption. So try not to lose sight of the business while chasing the dragon in terms of generative AI.
Brilliant. No, great. Some great advice there. Brilliant. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, it's been good to have you on the podcast.
Great. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. Have a good one.